Hello athletes, in today's video I'm going to talk very specifically about why zone 2 training, aka long slow distance, does not work for developing a good aerobic base for performance in rowing. Alright, specific to rowing, I have a lot of videos kind of talking about why that the general kind of paradigm around heart rate training is incorrect and does not apply to the broader population, that there's a lot more nuance to heart rate training than kind of what most either textbooks or certainly manufacturers want you to believe in terms of heart rate. And I will note that zone 2 is a heart rate based training zone, all right? And that in rowing, if you've stuck in it around enough of kind of either rowing videos or rowing forums, then you'll hear UT2 used a lot, or steady state used a lot to refer to training zone for rowing. And UT2 is also category 6 training if you're using that CAT system, which tends to be more popular in Canada and maybe some other countries, but definitely Canada. But that CAT 6, that oxygen utilization 2 or UT2 zone, is very frequently mistaken for zone 2 training, which is a heart rate training zone. Now UT2 is a blood lactate based training zone, all right? So you're looking at blood lactate of 2 millimoles or less. And I get a lot of people when I mention that, they're like, well, I can't measure my blood lactate. I've coached for well over a decade of youth athletes very successfully and have never measured blood lactate, all right? And so, we're saying that it's defined by 2 millimoles or less, but you can identify that simply by how you feel and how the workout is executed. You don't have to be sitting there pricking yourself and measuring exactly what that 2 millimoles is, all right? And I have a lot of videos talking about what UT2 feels like, but for today, I want to talk about why, all right? Why UT2 is important and why zone 2 training and long slow distance simply does not work for rowing. And the biggest reason for that is that rowing is a power endurance sport, all right? And all those sports where they're really big believers, big advocates for that zone 2 training, that long slow distance where you're just putting in a lot of miles at a comfortable pace just to build up that aerobic base. Those are all muscular endurance sports, all right? So you have cycling, you have running, all those are sports where there is not a huge strength component involved in the contraction and involved with the cadence that you're going to use both in training and racing. And now cadence is also a very important factor here. And so in running, generally you want to run around 180 steps per minute, all right? So 90 steps per foot, all right? And there's not going to be a huge amount of variability in that depending on how fast you're running and how fast you're training, all right? And so it's still going to be somewhere around that 180, maybe with a 5% increase or so, and very rarely will you see a decrease, all right, in that cadence, all right? And then with cycling you're going to be up around probably 90, up around as much as maybe 110 or more if you're like a pro level or high level cyclist doing a time trial. But you're definitely going to not see modern cyclists spending much time below an 85 cadence, all right? So around the time of kind of Lance Armstrong, and his work really kind of brought to light in the sport how effective those high cadences were, whereas cyclists like a Jan Ullrich or something like to pound those lower gears. Even then, you're not really getting below 80, all right? And so in rowing, all right, top tier rowing, maybe you can see like a lightweight 8 racing at about a 42 or so, all right? Probably the highest I remember ever seeing at the world's level. And generally everyone is going to be at least 36, all right? Maybe you might get a touch lower for kind of small boats, but for the most part, you're going to be in those high 30s. And that is a huge disparity between that power endurance sport of rowing and the cadences that you're using for your racing and cycling or running, where a lot of these kind of ideas of zone 2 training and long slow distance come from, all right? And so what's that mean? That means that you're essentially performing the same amount of work. Race pace is race pace, whether you're doing it as a runner, whether you're doing it as a rower, all right? So you're essentially producing that effort with anywhere from a half to a third of what cycling would be in terms of your cadences and how many kind of repetitions you're taking every minute, and as much as, what is that, 1/4 or less than 1/4 of what it would be for running. All right, and so that's why that strength component is so important. All right, you still have to boost that race quality effort at a fraction of the cadence and the repetitions that you would as a runner, as a cyclist. And I'm pretty sure swimming cadences are similar to cycling cadences, but I'm not as familiar with swimming as other sports, but I think it's around 90, but maybe kind of a quick Google check will confirm that. All right, so even with swimming, that long slow distance has value. All right, but you cannot do that in rowing. All right, and what's going to happen is that if you do use those long slow distance, all right, you do kind of go with that zone 2, so that comfortable low heart rate training, then you're going to develop very well aerobically. All right, and I've done this, I've experimented on myself. All right, all these training ideas and these methodologies have emerged from experimenting on myself. All right, so one of my key kind of tenets of coaching is don't ever ask somebody to do something you haven't done yourself, and I used myself as a guinea pig a lot in my training. That's probably a big reason actually why I never made that transition from pre-elite to elite, because my curiosity got the best of me, and I was more interested in kind of testing different things and being wrong a lot of times with those testing, as happens with hypotheses, and actually just kind of going with kind of tried and true methods and then getting to whatever level I could at that point. All right, but coming back to kind of the reasons, so is that rowing is that power endurance. All right, the long slow distance doesn't work. I've tried it myself. I've seen it with other athletes. What happens is you develop this really strong aerobic fitness, but when it comes time to kind of push up into those higher level efforts, those higher anaerobic efforts, and definitely those race level efforts, what you're going to find is that the muscles are going to fatigue very, very quickly. All right, because you haven't been executing the kind of power that you need to transfer up to those race cadences. And that's where then in training for rowing, your cadence and the combination of cadence, effort, and resistance, all right, if you're on the erg, that's drag factor, if you're on the water, that's your rig and that's your oar settings, all those come together to form, plus your effort, the UT2 training zone. All right, and then we were talking a little bit about cadences too, and this is where rowing is even more disparate from cycling, running, those long slow distance type sports, is that in training for rowing, you don't row around your race pace for all your training zones and just change your effort. All right, so in running, what's going to change as you go faster is going to be your stride length. All right, so each step you take, you're going to be going longer, but you're still taking the same amount of steps, whether you're going out for a long run or whether you're doing a shorter middle distance race or something like that. You're still going to be around that 180. In rowing, you're going to train much lower cadences because you don't want to just kind of tap along. Let's say your race pace is 36. You don't want to just tap around at a 36 for your steady state. One, the technical challenge of that is immense, but two, if you do that, what's happening is that you're being a lot lighter, all right, on your per stroke basis, all right, and you're not developing the strength that's going to be essential to transfer up into those race efforts. All right, and so let's say steady state generally tends to be between 16 and 18 strokes a minute. Race pace may be 36 strokes per minute, so you're training at 50%. All right, 50% of your cadence in that main bulk of your training, all right, which is going to be about 83% of your training volume when you are in the general base building phase, and about 53% of your volume when you're getting closer and transitioning to your competitive phase. All right, so regardless, it's still the majority, sometimes the vast majority, sometimes a slight majority of your overall training is going to be in that UT2 at a cadence that's probably half of what your race cadence is, or at least should be. All right, and so if then we take that and compare that to running, where you're pretty much 180 all the time, and effort is just determined by how long your stride is and how far you're pushing with each step, you're looking at, what's that, 18, let's say 20 to make it easy, out of 180, and so that's 9 times, so you're 1/9. All right, so that's about maybe 11% or so of the cadence of running for the same effort that you're using in rowing. And so what's that mean? That means that your effort in those strokes has to be strong, all right? We have to work really hard on a per stroke basis, all right? And so in order to do that, we're pushing that kind of effort level up, all right? You know, the heart rate is probably gonna go up with it as well, all right? And I have lots of videos talking about heart rate, all right, and why kind of the general paradigm of heart rate training does not work, how heart rate is a very individual thing, how you can't just plug a population into a bunch of different training zones, how training zones have a great deal of overlap. And so certainly when they're saying, you know, train 70-80% for this zone and 80-85 for this zone and 85 to 90 for this zone, that's definitely bonkers because UT1 and UT2 overlap by almost 2/3, and TR, transport, and AT overlap almost completely, probably about 80%, you know, overlap or so, at least 70% overlap between those training zones, all right? And that difference, that other 30%, is just the very top end, all right? So the bottom end, 70% of your transport heart rate zones are probably gonna overlap 100% with your AT training zones, and your AT training zones are probably gonna overlap about 70% with your UT1 training zones, all right? And so that's my kind of tangent of why the heart rate doesn't work. But in rowing, you have to work hard. You have to constantly be developing the strength, all right, that you need to transfer up into those higher zones, all right? So effective UT2 training is about effort, it's about cadence, it's about volume, and it's also about resistance, all right? If you have the wrong drag factor, all right, for your rowing, or you have the wrong gear settings on your boat for UT2 rowing, you're not gonna be training efficiently in that UT2 zone, all right? If your drag factor is too high, your legs are not gonna be moving fast enough, so you're not gonna be quick enough to respond to the speed demands of rowing on the water, all right, where the water is moving, and you have to connect to that moving source in order to provide impulse moving forward. Same thing for indoor rowing, all right? The flywheel is gonna move fast, all right? The faster you go, the faster that flywheel is gonna be. And so if you don't have enough quickness in your legs, you're not gonna be able to effectively connect with that fast moving flywheel and then get it moving even faster, all right? And so that quickness is the thing. And I might make an entire video just on that concept, all right? Why kind of quickness and speed is essential for performance, both on the water and on the indoor rowing machine. But coming back to the topic, all right? Why long slow distance doesn't work for rowing, all right? Why that zone 2 rowing, which is, you know, corollary, synonymous with long slow distance, does not work for rowing is because in rowing you have to constantly be working at a high pressure per stroke to engage and to develop that strength and that power. And when I say power, I'm talking about power in the strength training sense of the speed that you move a high load, all right? And so power has a lot of different definitions, and people have commented on my videos of like, you don't understand what power is. Power has a lot of different definitions. It has a definition in physics, it has a definition in strength training, it has a definition kind of in electricity, you know, and so when I'm talking about power, I'm using the strength training thing. And so how quickly you move a heavy load, all right? That is power, all right? And strength is just what that load is that you're moving, all right? And so when I talk about strength, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, so strength is measured by your 1 rep max. Power in this sense is going to be measured by how much you can lift, maybe let's say 80 or so % of your max, and how quickly you can move 50% of your max, all right? That is going to be important in rowing, going back to that reason, because in rowing you use a moving system or a moving component to produce impulse, all right? Whether it's the flywheel that's moving and you have to connect it to a moving flywheel and then move it even faster, all right? You have to connect to moving water and then move the boat even faster by putting pressure against that moving water, all right? So you must always develop that strength at that low cadence, all right? And if you are just at that conversational pace, what's gonna happen is that you're going to slow down your leg drive, all right? And you're not gonna be developing the speed that you need to transfer up into those race paces, all right? And you're also not gonna be developing the strength because the stroke will feel lighter and you're not engaging the muscles in the same way. You're not gonna develop that strength so that when you get into that race situation, you may feel great. Your steady state times might be amazing. You may have had huge improvements, but then suddenly you get into that race situation and you get about a quarter of the way through and then your fitness is irrelevant because your weakness in the muscles and your lack of strength is going to handicap and retard any ability to access that fitness base that you've developed. All right, so that is going to be your weak link, and you're always going to be limited in how fast you go by what that weakest link is. All right, and that's what happens when you train long slow distance zone 2 for rowing. And I will do a final caveat here with heart rate training, all right? So heart rate training is different for every person, all right? And the problems with heart rate training is that they try to give these general zones applied to the broad population. And even if you're taking your custom heart rate zone, your heart rate reserve, whatever the system that you're using is, all right? If what you're using can be applied to a large population, it is not going to work, all right? Everybody has their own heart rate profiles, all right? If you want to train by heart rate, you need to spend several months learning that profile and learning how your heart rate moves and beats and what your cardiac drift is for various efforts. And then you kind of take that and then you build your general heart rate zones around that, all right? But what happens with heart rate training and why people are so adamant about it, because usually people that are looking for info in heart rate training, they're lost, all right? They're not training efficiently. And what's gonna happen is that if you have 100 people, then you're gonna have 100 different zones, but there's gonna be a distribution, all right? So if you know statistics, it's gonna be a standard deviation from the norm, all right? There's gonna be the median of what the heart rates are for those 100 people, and then there's going to be people 1 standard deviation out, 2 standard deviations out, and you might have some outliers beyond that, all right? And so what the general info about heart rate training does is it kind of publishes what is within that norm, that median. And I wouldn't even say it gets out to the first standard deviation, because I would say that the general heart rate information out there probably is only going to be helpful for maybe 20% of the population or so. But what happens is that 20% of the population find heart rate training, and it happens by coincidence to put them in the zones that they're supposed to be, and suddenly they start training efficiently for all of their aerobic training. And of course, when you do that, you get significantly faster, and then they become, devotees of that, disciples of that training methodology, and then blast it out that it works, that it works, that it works. But the thing is, it worked for them, all right? It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And that's why I really kind of gets under my skin when people talk about heart rate training, because they try to present this kind of template that can be just kind of everyone can plug into it, and that's not how it works. Even when you customize what your max heart rate is, or what your heart rate zones based on your heart rate reserve and your max heart rate, also BS, all right? It just doesn't work, all right? It's, you have a statistical, likelihood that it may work for you, but there's no guarantee. And if it doesn't work for you, then chances are you're going to be significantly under training, and you're not gonna be using your time efficiently. And I think that's the greatest sin, certainly for a coach, but even for an athlete, is to waste time. All right, as a coach, you should never waste your athlete's time. You should always make sure they're getting the most out of their investment of self and energy and time into their training. All right, and that's kind of like a key tenet for me and my coaching, is make sure that you are respecting the time of your athlete, using it efficiently. And actually, quick shout out there, gtsrowing.com. If you're interested, if that tenet, that philosophy really resonates with you, check out gtsrowing.com. I do remote coaching and consulting there, but and I can help you out. I can work with you directly and make sure that you're not wasting your time with training. All right, but that's my quick plug. But I hope this video helped. I hope it helped you understand a little bit about why long slow distance doesn't work for rowing. Rowing is power endurance, cycling, running, swimming, muscular endurance sports. All right, so be careful transferring concepts from one sport to the next, and listening to people that don't understand those differences and don't understand how to properly apply it to a broad population. But that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Definitely check out the description for a bunch of valuable links. I have recently started a Patreon for people to support this channel and support my work on this. The more I collect in that Patreon, the more time I can spend making videos like this and helping to educate you guys. I'll also be adding channel memberships soon, so if you see a little join button right under this video, you can hop on there, and actually the benefits are very similar and as close to identical as I could get between YouTube and Patreon. And so once you support at higher levels, you get different benefits and different access to content that is not access to the general public. But that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope this helped. If you have questions, put it down in the comments below. Let's help stimulate a discussion and a better understanding of rowing and training for rowing. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.